Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we're in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Lynn Nesbitt, and I'm chairing today's panel. Joining me on the panel are Kent Seelan and Diane Knight. Our assessor is Matthew Barocas, and our administrative personnel is Twinkle Sharma. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along on the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 2 through 5 on our docket today. Ms. Sharma, please affirm the assessor's and applicant's testimony.
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Matthew Barocas.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Applicant, please state your full name.
Farah Cates.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before we begin, I would just like to note for participants of this hearing that we do have a deadline today. We have to be completed our hearing by 1 o'clock, no later than that. So if we could, well, you know the drill, kind of keep to your points and let's not get off track. Our first item on the agenda is item number 2. This is file 25-2290 Alexander Avenue. This is...
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but before we proceed, can I put item 4 and 5 applicant, Mr. Neufeld, in waiting room?
Of course.
Or if he wants to join in, he is most welcome to.
He's not listening.
Okay, I'm putting Mr. Neufeld in the waiting room then.
Thank you.
speak. We can continue.
Okay, this is back to item number 2, 90 Alexander, and this is an appeal of the assessment of the assessed value of the property, Ms. Cates?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Barocas, when you're ready, please.
Thank you very much. File 25-23, roll number 13099072185 90 Alexander Avenue. It's an apartment.
Mr. Barocas, just to confirm, this is file 25-22 we're starting with.
Oh, you're starting at 2-2. Okay, sorry. Let me get the other one open now. Yeah, sorry. I gotta pull up the other one.
Not a problem.
Yeah. File 25-22, roll number 13099072185, 90 Alexander Avenue. It's a Res Am building, so it's an apartment with some unfinished commercial shell space on the main floor, just over 6,000 square feet. So we've got 2 lines of valuation here. It's 46,000,009 on total valuation. 459 being that commercial shell space, the rest of it being a new apartment at 46,441. So we've got 2 buildings. One is a 4-story building constructed in 1904. It has an effective age of 1946 to reflect the renovations completed to convert it into a multi-residential building. That's the smaller component. And then there's the rest of it is a brand new apartment built 2023. So that's why we see such a wide gap between the actual year built and the effective year built to encompass both buildings. 206 suites, no indoor parking, 25 outdoor parking. On to page 2. So these requests for income information were pertaining to the building before it was used as an apartment, so it wouldn't be relevant to project we're looking at now. Subject sale history, I believe that's land only. Or not sorry, land only, but for the not as it is improved now. This is prior to the construction of the apartment. Page 3 shows the breakdown. We've got 166 1-bedroom, 42 bedroom, 206 units. 1591.22 is the average monthly rent assigned to the property. For the apartment units, so that comes out to a gross potential 3,933,496, and then with a modeled expense ratio and a 4.9 cap, 46,441 rounded, and that's 225 per unit. So that's right in the ballpark of what we're seeing for new builds. And then we've got our unfinished commercial shell space in the main floor of the new building. And so we've got 83,005 on the gross potential with a 6.2 cap. There's an adjustment for the unfinished nature. So if you go to the next page, on page 4, you can see that the rent assigned to this commercial space, we actually have it divided in two spaces, but we don't have it. We have the same area as the applicant does in terms of the total premise area, so that's not something that we're in disagreement of. Rents are, 13.75 to 14 per square foot. The unfurnished commercial deduction was $120 per square foot. You'll see in the pictures as we go along that it's completely bare. So
Mr. Sessa, we cannot hear you. I'm so sorry for interrupting.
yeah, no problem. So the unfinished commercial area has a 120 square foot fit up deduction on it. So that's where that 700,022 comes off of the valuation. The applicant has the same valuation deduction as well. On to the next page. Rent comparables for the apartment side. They bracket the subject property, and they are in the downtown area as well. So they're older buildings that have been renovated. There's 109 James. That's probably the proximity wise the best comp. And when you look at the rents, they're showing there 1629, mix of 1 and 2s. We're at 1591, so I think we're pretty good on the rent. The comparable leases are found on page 6, and they range from $11 to almost 17. We're in the middle of the range there, so our rents are supported. Cap rate chart that I'm sure everyone's seen here 100 times at this point. Just some sales that took place. If you look at 2390 McPhillips, that's the newest build, 2015. And it is further out towards the perimeter. There's not a lot of new build sales, but we're at 250 in a unit and 4.8 on the cap. So this one we're 225 a unit, and we're 4.9. We're 4.9 on the cap, right? Yeah, we're 4.9 on the cap. So like I touched on it before, we're right in that ballpark of what we're saying. So our cap and workup is spitting out a value that's reflective of the most recent sale of a new building. Overall cap rate chart on page 8. Then on page 9, there's just a couple of sales transactions that didn't go through land titles of newer builds. And we don't have the workups, but I included them because we want to look at things on a per unit basis as well. Now, this first one at Luminous South Point, that is like a kind of more like attached single family dwelling townhouse with it's not physically comparable to our subject property, so I wouldn't really put much weight on that one. But when you're looking at these more typical apartments, newer apartments, there's this place on Good Street, Urban Square, sold for almost 270 a unit in University Center, or 30 University Crescent, sold for 265 a unit. And these are newer ones. We're only at 225. And yeah, they're in different areas, but it's giving you an idea of the market. This is from a presentation made by the Winnipeg Real Estate Board. So it's a double check looking on a per unit basis, the suitability of our conclusion here. So we're at 225. And granted, some of the building is a bit older. The older building that was renovated has an effective age of 1946, but the majority is the new building. Then we have some pictures just from the website carrying on through the rest of the brief. Page 11 shows the amenities, the location, etc. Then we have the permits and whatnot. And then just on page 16, you can see the building. So the black and gray portion, that's the newer portion, and then that piece kind of sandwiched in the middle. I don't know what you would call that shape. It's like a irregularly shaped rectangle or something. The tan color building, that's the older building that's been renovated. So it is a mix, but most of it is new. And then we have some interior pictures as well from the website. So it's looks pretty good. And then the unfinished commercial space, just to round out my presentation here at the end. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barocas. Ms. Cates, do you have questions for Mr. Barocas?
Yes, I have some questions, and I was hoping just to spend a bit more time on the questions on this file, and then they'll carry forward to the next file.
Okay.
Okay. So for this property, have you had the opportunity to inspect?
A member of our staff did. I did not, but I did go do an exterior inspection of it.
And the building that is the older building that's over 100 years old, that would have a heritage status, is that correct?
I don't have that information in my brief, but I suspect you might.
Okay. And in terms of the parking, there's only 25 parking stalls for 200 units. Would you agree that the parking is insufficient?
Well, I mean, it is downtown. It'd be better if there was more parking. Obviously, they'd be able to pull from a bigger net of people. But if they were having vacancy issues, then I would say it's insufficient for the neighborhood. But until it's shown that that's something that's holding their income producing potential back, I wouldn't jump on it to say that it's insufficient. We don't have any parking spots on record that aren't there, so we're not including any income that ought not to be. So unless they have vacancy problems, I'd say it's okay.
Okay. But if you had a building that was kind of in the medium to higher end of the rent range and they don't have enough parking, would you not see that as potentially increasing the risk of the property?
Again, and if they were having vacancy issues, then yes. But until there's a record of them not being able to fill the place, and then we can look at, well, maybe it's because people think that they don't want to park their car on the street or whatever, or nearby parking lots they can rent. I wouldn't be able to say that that's risk or anything like that. I mean, the developer did build it this way, so.
And the property is outside of the Exchange District neighborhood, is that correct?
I don't know the exact boundary. It's more like waterfront. I mean, I'm in the Exchange District right now. I think I can walk there in about 5-10 minutes. So it's kind of all one and the same in my mind anyway.
Okay, but not how the city would classify the neighborhoods.
I don't have the neighborhood map in my brief, so I don't know where the boundary is.
Okay. So on page 3, looking at your income value summary for the residential portion, would it be fair to say that you've not taken these risk factors into account in your cap rate of 4.9%?
Well, I don't think there are risk factors, to be honest. I mean, you're saying it's a heritage building, but they're still able to renovate it and get people in there. So it's not like they're handcuffed and the work is done. It's not like they purchased it and they're going back and forth and wondering whether they can do what they want to do with the purchase. And until there's a sustained elevated vacancy, you can't just say that there's risk because of the parking or lack thereof, because there's nothing to support that contention. That's just an idea at this point. So I would respectfully disagree that there's risk involved for the aforementioned.
Okay. So in terms of your vacancy rate of 5.3%, that would just be like a market rate based on all the apartments downtown?
Yes, it would be based on the, to my knowledge, the general downtown area.
Okay, and in your experience, do new apartment developments of this size downtown typically run at market rates, or have they been slower to absorb, such as 300 Assiniboine, 300 Main?
Well, I mean, those are much bigger, so obviously it's going to take more time to fill them up. Now, this place is pretty big as well, but it is a long-term investment, right? So if they were to sell it, the vendor, like tomorrow, the vendor probably wouldn't agree to a lower sale price based on a temporary lease up elevated vacancy rate. So I think 5.3 is good. I know it's a bit higher downtown than compared to the suburbs that that I'm not in disagreement with. We've seen that with CMHC as well. But I think 5.3 is good.
And then turning to, still on page 3, but then just looking at the income value summary for the commercial. So the commercial portion is valued using suburban office parameters, but the property is downtown, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, it does say suburban. That should be changed.
Okay. And then just jumping around a bit, so when looking at the cap rate for the commercial 6.2 and then comparing it to the cap rates on page 8, like in terms of what the city's saying for downtown A and B, 6.2 would be below what the city's suggesting for the best downtown office. Is that correct?
Let me see here. Yeah, that is correct. One moment. Yeah, I didn't notice that. Thanks for pointing that out. Let me see. Yeah, that cap rate is too the cap rate is too low. So I'm just trying to do a quick review here in regards to what I ought to change it to. Okay, I gotta make an amendment to this because I think Fair made a very good point there. Okay, let me get my spreadsheet out quick and I'll make an amendment. So 7.3, 7.3. And so I'll explain my thinking as I'm doing the calculations. So when I go to the chart on page 8, you see downtown A, downtown B, 20th to 80th, 6.5 for A and then 7 for B. So what I'll do is I will take the same net operating income of 73,000, 273, and then I'll apply a 6 3/4. Cap rate to it. And so then that generates a valuation of pre-discount of 1,085,525. And then I'll take the deduction off that. Equals this plus X. Okay, so then I'll make a recommendation verbal, to reduce the commercial portion, 363,000.
Okay, let me just repeat that so everybody's got it, including myself. You've maintained your NOI at 73,273. You've adjusted the cap rate upwards to 6.75, less the adjustment, which remains unchanged for a final value of 363,000 on the commercial.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Just so we all have it. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Cates. Any other questions?
Just a couple more questions if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. So just turning back to page 4, in terms of this loft warehouse space of 20,000 square feet, I guess just to clarify, that would be the unfinished basement in the heritage building, but it's not leased out and it's not really capable of earning any income at this time.
We sorted that out ahead of time. That's additional area that was removed from the
Okay.
commercial. We originally had another commercial premise that, if I recall our discussion, that we deemed unleasable.
And then just on page 9 with the sales, when you comment on looking at properties on a per unit basis, it would really only be valid to look at properties on a per unit basis if they're all the same size in terms of units. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and area and whatnot. I'll just provide this to show a general sense of what these more recent transactions have gone for that didn't go through land titles on a per unit basis. Because you can get convoluted with the cap rate calculation when you're arguing about stabilizing various line items. But ultimately, what the sale price is on a per unit basis is what it is. And so we're saying these newer ones are in the 270, 265 ballpark, and we're only at 225 on this one. And McPhillips sold at 215. So it doesn't look like we're overshooting it.
Thank you. That would conclude my questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Seelan, do you have questions for the assessor?
Yes, mentioned the comparables, 2390 McPhillips, and you mentioned that this was the closest comparable. These are in 2 totally different neighborhoods, true?
Yes, and I just want to clarify my comments. Closest in regards to year built and number of units. Because it's a newer build, we're looking at, for a cap rate analysis, the sales of other new buildings. So that's what I'm looking at. The other ones, while they are closer, they are older and they're smaller. So while they're, one's in the suburbs and one's, right downtown on waterfront, I would put more weight on the McPhillips sale.
Do we know what the parking is for the McPhillips location?
Yeah, parking's not, I think it's closer to 1-to-1 at least out there. But again, you're out there, between a car dealership and a Walmart, a couple of golf shots from the perimeter. So you kind of need a car there. Whereas if you're downtown, you have greater access to public transportation. So it's almost like 2 different markets that would be interested in either apartment. So I mean, it'd be great to have the sale of a newer building downtown in the area, but it just doesn't exist. I know the one on Good Street in my where is this chart on page 9? That would be closer to the downtown area. You can see in the picture, and it's sold for like almost 270 a unit. on share sale, so we're at 225.
Just a final question. You mentioned you toured the exterior of building.
Yep.
Is there parking lots close to this building within the, I'll say outside the exterior that you saw?
Oh, let me look at a map. It was a while ago. That's one thing I didn't take note of. Let me see. Let me do a quick air photo here. I mean, there's Chibo across the street, but I think that parking lot would probably be for the hotel guests. If you go, let me see here. If you go further north, looks like off Galt Street, there's a commercial parking lot between Edwin and Duncan onto its own. There's another one on 308 Edwin. There's parking. So there's this street. It looks like there'd be some surface parking ability, but it's not like immediately like across the street from the subject. So that's what I'm saying.
Thank you. That's all my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Seelan. Ms. Knight, questions for the assessor?
Yeah, just to page 12, page 11 and 12, that's the actual building, the 9100 Alexander, is that correct? The Bend it's called?
Yes.
So there it's saying parking details, surface parking 175 and covered parking 200, but there's only 9 spots.
Yes. There's not a lot of parking on the site. I remember walking because you can kind of walk. There's like an archway you can walk like through the property.
Mm-hmm.
The parking amount we have is the correct amount, so there isn't a lot of parking. Those are the rates for the few spots they have.
Okay. And the other properties on Waterfront
Yeah.
and Alex, whatever the street is called, they all have parking enough for their buildings, or they don't really have parking in that area?
I'm not sure. Some might.
Mhm.
Some probably don't, just given that it's the downtown area, and they might not have the space or the ability to have an
Right.
underground lot.
But this place is pretty full? You've got it as a 5.3 vacancy?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Because I don't have like pre-reference date rent rolls,
Mm-hmm.
but like we put a new building on, we don't take we don't put an elevated vacancy on it because it's a long-term investment, right?
Right.
For the reasons that I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I understand that.
yeah, I would suspect that it's probably full or close to. That I'm sure the applicant will correct me if my assumption is incorrect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knight. Mr. Brokus, I just want to ask you about the expense rate on the apartment side, 38.91. It's fairly low from what I've seen for apartments. Can you explain that lower rate?
I mean, that's just the model rate that we're seeing based on the income and expense mailers we receive. Like it is predominantly a newer building or an older building that has been completely renovated.
So would you expect to see this low an expense rate for newer buildings typically?
Yeah, this is what we typically see.
Okay. this might be a little bit unfair, but what is the average expense rate for apartments in the city?
Oh, well, I mean, that depends on
Mhm.
how old it
A whole
is.
host of things, yeah,
Yeah, that can be,
yeah. So what do you think an average would be?
an average.
Yeah,
Oof.
just ballpark? What's high? What would be high?
What's high?
Yeah, 60?
Towards like 55%, I would say. When you're getting
Okay.
like 55 and above, then you're looking at something. I mean,
So,
I've been doing this a while, so usually around there, it's like, okay, you see apartments, that they get over 50, but sometimes they just need to do more maintenance. And the newer ones, we sometimes get mailers where it's like it's like 32%. Well, that's not something that is like long-term sustainable, right? Because things are going to degrade, and anyone buying this is going to assume that they're going to have to spend more than that.
so the model generated at 38.91, that's not something that you'd raise your eyes about because it's a new build.
Yeah, not for a new build. That's a high 30%, low 40%. That is for a new build, yes. If this building was 30 years old, then it would definitely be too low.
Okay. And the cap of 4.9, again, because it's a new build?
Yes, definitely. And then like ultimately what we're talking about is like the bottom line, right? And the bottom line, we got 225 per unit, which lines up with McPhillips, and then those examples on either lower than the examples on page 9. So that, like ultimately that's what we're looking at, the suitability of that bottom line.
Mhm. And so the elements of expense rate and cap, which are probably one of the biggest drivers getting you to that value. I see there's no dispute here on rent. So those two elements you see are fine given the ultimate 225 per unit.
Yeah, that's what it is. Like it's like ultimately if the ingredients in our formula here are leading to a conclusion that is supported by market data on a per unit basis, because that's not something that can be, it changes.
Okay.
Then I think we're good.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brokus. Ms. Cates, your presentation, please.
Thank you. So if you turn to page 2 of our brief, we have a summary of some of the facts of the property along with our requested assessments. So for the class code 20, that would be 38,369,000, and for the class code 60, that would be 170,000, for a total of $38,539,000. On page 4, under the scope of work, we did do an interior and exterior inspection in March of 2024, and I've included the photos in the appendix. On page 6, we have the property site maps, so the aerial map view and then the Google map view. So what you can see from the Google map views, once you're outside of the Exchange District, you start moving more toward the kind of Point Douglas area, which would be less desirable than being right in the Exchange. And the reality with Winnipeg is it is a block by block city, especially when you're downtown. So the differences between waterfront at Bannatyne and waterfront at Alexander are notable. I've also included a pictometry view on page 7, and then an exterior photo that I took on page 8. On page 9, we have the property description. So the property is at the southwest corner of Alexander and Waterfront in the Civic Center area. The property has 2 buildings. The older building is a heritage building. It was previously known as the WJ Guest Fish Company / Great West Metal Company building. Both buildings are presently being used as multiple family residential buildings. The site size is about 1.1 acres. There are 206 units, mostly 1-bedrooms. There are 25 outdoor parking stalls, and the unit sizes range from 431 square feet to 947 square feet. And the property contains main floor commercial of 6,020 square feet, which has remained vacant since the property has been built, and it is in unfinished shell condition. On page 14, we have the overview of our income approach. So the units began leasing in June of 2023. So we don't have actual rents from the property to review in our analysis. I've taken a look at CMHC in terms of what they would suggest for new market apartments, and they would suggest $1,354 for a 1-bedroom, $1,621 for a 2-bedroom, which based on the subject property suite mix would indicate a gross potential rent of $3,475,000. So the assessor's rents are on the higher end of the range, but for the purpose of the report, we're not going to dispute those figures and we're going to account for it in the vacancy allowance. So when we're looking at vacancy for properties downtown, especially when you're looking at the kind of medium to higher end of the rental range, they are slower to absorb and they tend to maintain higher vacancy rates going forward. And we've seen this with the operation of other large scale developments downtown that operate like this, such as 300 Assiniboine and 300 Main. Even beyond lease up, they continue to maintain higher vacancy rates. So I did submit a downtown vacancy study for our 2024 file, but the same concepts would apply here. So we are applying a vacancy rate of 7.5%. If you turn to page 15, the expense allowance, we are applying a higher rate. For brand new apartments, we would typically see an expense ratio in kind of the mid to high 30% range to the low to mid 40% range. The lower end of the range would typically be for maybe low rise with no elevator, no other elements to really maintain. So when we're looking at a property like this, with more stories that also has a building that's over 100 years old, it should probably be at the higher end of the range. And I've provided some expense comps to review. And just the other point that I would make is that operating expenses are known to increase over time. So if a 40% expense ratio is applied to the 2024 file, it doesn't follow that the expenses would decrease over a 2-year period. So we're applying a 42% expense ratio, which works out to $1,528,163. On page 16, we have our cap rate for the subject. We are disputing the cap rate of 4.9. We're applying a cap rate of 5.5%. When looking at this property, we would apply a base cap rate, 5.25%. Our range for newer properties would start at 5 and it would go to 5.75. So I'm applying a base cap rate slightly higher to reflect that there is an older building on this site. And then additionally, when we look at the facts of this property, the older building does have a heritage designation. Even if they are able to do a lot of changes, the heritage designation does put a caveat on title. So it does restrict what they can do. Additionally, insufficient parking, 0.12 stalls per unit. I did confirm with the owner that there is only 25 parking stalls. So at this stage, they're really only able to offer parking to the 2-bedroom units. And it does limit the desirability of the property. Additionally, location. It is outside the Exchange District. Granted, things downtown are close, but even when you're looking at something that's 5-10 minutes away, the area can change. So I actually was able to speak to someone who lived at this property and they did describe just some, overall kind of nuisance behavior at this property. There are, people outside, there's garbage, noise, things like that. So I think that does have to be taken into account for this property. So that is how I arrived at a 5.5% cap rate. So in terms of our evaluation on page 18, you can see how these features fit together. So we have an NOI of $2,110,321 with a 5.5% cap rate, gives us an indicated value of $38,369,000. Now, if you turn to page 19, that's where I have the office valuation for the property. So the current valuation is treating the commercial space as suburban office. We are disputing this. The property is downtown and should be valued with downtown parameters. So with the city's valuation being suburban office, that's affecting the parameters like vacancy, shortfall, things like that. So getting into this, looking at the rent, the property is in unfinished shell condition and it has remained vacant, so we've looked to rent comps since there's no actual leases of the property. So we found a variety of rent comps that are located nearby, trying to get at similar sizes to the CRUs. And we're using a rent of $15 a square foot. So this is based on weighing all the comps, but acknowledging that our comp on waterfront is probably a closer match. Granted, that part of waterfront would be considered to be slightly better location wise, and to note, they did have trouble even leasing up that property. So I think $15 a square foot makes sense for the subject. And then for vacancy, we are looking at OFB rates. So I've applied 12%, shortfall $14 a square foot, and sticking with 3% non-recovered. Cap rate on page 21. So I would say that this type of property would be somewhere between a Class B and a Class C office. It's not quite a Class C because it's not as old as those properties would typically be, but it's not quite a Class B either because Class B implies that it could be kind of converted to a Class A with renovations, and this commercial space would never be Class A. So in terms of the cap rate, we've applied at 7.5%. Page 22. We've applied the unfinished allowance of $120 a square foot based on our research and knowledge that would be within the appropriate range. So then I have the commercial valuation on page 23. So we have a value of $170,000 rounded. Now, if you turn to page 26, that's the start of our appendix. So just to walk through these photos briefly. So we start with the common area for the new building. And then on page 31, I have a unit example from the new building. So you can see the different features. And then starting on page 39, this would be kind of some of the more common area for the heritage building. So you can see all the elements that they have to kind of keep in this property. And then page 47, this would be the basement area for the heritage building. So this is not in a condition to be leased out, nor to have any rent in place at the moment. They do have on page 53 a small gym area in the heritage building for the tenants of the apartment. And then there's some storage, page 55. And then we have a unit example of the heritage building starting on page 56. So you could see how these units look. And then page 67, this is the unfinished commercial space on the main floor. And then some exterior photos starting on page 71. And then in the last few pages of the appendix, I've also included the heritage information for the property. And one other point I would mention before I wrap up is that, when we're looking at downtown apartments compared to suburban, they do have to be looked at uniquely. When we're looking at a lot of newer suburban properties, they tend to lease up fairly quick. In terms of the downtown, this property is still not leased up. So I think these things have to be taken into account when we're looking at this property. And that would conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cates. Mr. Barocas, questions?
Yeah, just a couple. So on a per unit basis, your valuation of 38,369, it's about 186 per unit. Given what other new buildings have transacted for on a per unit basis, does this seem low to you?
It is lower than what we see for some other buildings, but these units are also quite small. So that's the issue with comparing on a per unit basis, is if you're doing a direct comparison and not all factors are equated for, then it's not really an accurate comparison. Like there's a lot of units that are less than, 500-600 square feet. So having a lower assessment per unit doesn't seem out of sorts when considering that.
Okay, and then your your cap of 5.5 here, just looking on page 16. That's like the base rate that you use for buildings from 1970 to 1989. Looking on page 16, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. But the majority of this building was built in 2023, right?
yes, I would agree to that, which is why we're starting with a lower base rate and then taking into account the risk factors with the higher cap rate.
So on 16, it says 2005 up, your range is from 5 to 5.75. But then in your chart here, it says your base rate cap starts at 5.25. Wouldn't it start at 5?
So in terms of the first chart, those would indicate the base rates that we might consider, so. Typically for something brand new, yes, I would start at 5%. But given that there is this older building at the property, I've started at a slightly higher base.
Looking at the overall location of the property, would you agree that there is less available developable land downtown than there would be, say, like in the suburbs?
Yes,
And in terms of, you mentioned some issues in regards to people and garbage around the property, but isn't that subject, doesn't that affect all properties? Like there's garbage everywhere and there are people everywhere?
I don't agree that that would affect all properties if you have people kind of camped out of the property, kind of garbage everywhere, noise at all hours. You don't really see that with suburban properties.
There's people on the property camping, is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying it's at all times, but I did speak to someone who lived there and they did say that that was an issue in kind of the warmer summer months.
Right, but I mean, that's something that's like endemic to downtown, is it not? Like that's Winnipeg, right?
Yeah, you do see that at some other downtown locations as well. Yeah. But it still has to be taken into account.
All right, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barocas. Ms. Knight, questions for Ms. Cates? Oh, you're muted.
Holy, taking that for craziness. My question was asked and answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knight. Mr. Seelan?
Just a quick question. I was looking at some of the pictures. I noticed what appeared to be a boiler, but I also noticed a lot of electric heat. This building, is it boiler heated or is it electric heat?
I don't know that that's something I have a lot of knowledge on, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. That's all. Any questions, Madam Chair?
Thank you. Ms. Cates, you talk about the heritage status, but what are the restrictions particularly?
So there's degree of heritage status designation. Some are more restrictive, others less restrictive. There used to be a grading system for heritage where it would be like grade 1 means you have to protect these elements, grade 2, etc. After a certain point, they stopped doing those grading elements. But I think the report, just one moment. Yeah, so I would believe it would be on page 79 when they talk about certain exterior elements, certain interior elements. Those would likely be the things that would have to be maintained.
Doesn't say that though, right? It just says these are the these are the elements, but it doesn't say,
That's correct. It doesn't explicitly state it, but I believe that might be part of how they changed their grading system. Because it used to be grade 1, 2, 3, and then stuff that kind of became heritage more recently, they don't list those grades anymore, but. This is
Okay,
from
but-
the heritage report and
yeah.
they're listing these items, so I would assume that it means it has to be maintained, but you're correct, it doesn't explicitly
yeah,
say that.
yeah. And I see you haven't printed the actual report that lists like the city's report or the historical.
Well, this is the city's report, I just didn't put, it's quite long, so I didn't put all of it.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I think that's all the questions I had. Ms. Cates, do you have rebuttal evidence?
No,
No?
thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Brokus?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brokus, summation on this property?
I think, I don't, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Cates?
I'm good as well, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, that will conclude item number 2. So we'll move to item number 3. It's the same property, different assessment year. So I'm presuming we could probably dispense with some of the discussion as we've had it before or already. So Mr. Brokus, if you could begin with file number 25-23, 90 Alexander.
Okay, file number 25-23, roll number 13099072185. Same property as we just discussed. We've got 258 this time on the commercial and 41,658,000 on the residential component. I mean, same physical factors here. On page 3, we've got our workup for both line items. So we've got 40% expense ratio, 5.3 on the cap this time as per the model for 202 on the per unit, market value per unit. So, and then on the office, we do have it classified as suburban. So I did glance ahead. The model has a 7.4 cap on this. So when I looked at the chart on page 8, and I looked into making an adjustment, what you see is when you're looking at the downtown caps 20th to 80th on page 8, we're actually right above that. Like we're a good amount above all categories for downtown and suburban. So I can't bring down the cap because that would increase the assessment, which is something I'd have to make a request for. So I'm not going to touch it. So overall, the same unfinished area of 722,400 was applied to the commercial to recognize the physical nature of it. Rents are found on page 5. Comparable leases are found on page 6. And the rest of my brief is the same as last go around. That's my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brokus. Ms. Cates?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Seelan?
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Knight?
Sorry, no questions. Jeez
Thank
Louise.
you. Thank you.
Oh,
Mr. Brokus, I have a question. In this, on the apartment side, your model applies 40% expenses. Looking at the following year, now it's 39%. Would you see that as fairly similar? Just because sort of a rounding thing, it's like 1% difference or?
Yeah, I mean, we're within like 2%, almost 1%, so it's pretty much assigning the same expense ratio. It just, what mailers were submitted to us.
And of course, you don't have mailers that you can rely on, right?
Right. So kind of the model expense ratio here, newer build right around 40%. That's typical.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Ms. Cates, your presentation, please.
Thank you. So I'll just move to our valuations on page 14. So again, we've taken a look at CMHC rents. The city's rents would appear to be a bit high, but we're not going to contest those. Again, we'll account for it in a higher vacancy. I have submitted the downtown vacancy study that we used for the 23-24 cycle for this file. So we're applying 7.5%. The expense allowance, 40%, that would make sense for the property. So we're not contesting 40% expenses. And in terms of the cap rate, page 16, we're applying a higher cap rate, 5.75%. One thing that we looked at for working both of these files is that they consistently made sense with each other. We did see some compression in 2025 cap rates compared to 23-24. So we've reflected that in the 25 file. Whereas I would say in reviewing the city's valuation, it appears that their valuations are not consistent between the 2 years based on actual market trends. So on page 18, we have our valuation. So we're using an NOI of $2,109,810 with a 5.75% cap rate, gives an indicated value of $36,692,000 rounded. On page 19, again, for our office valuation, we've applied similar methodology. So we're using $15 a square foot rent. We're using OFB parameters for vacancy, 11%, shortfall at $12 a square foot, non-recoverable expenses, 3%. And then we've also applied a 7.5% cap rate for the property. That's on page 21. Page 22, $120 a square foot unfinished allowance. And then we have our office valuation on page 23. So we have an indicated value of $211,000, and that's due to the different parameters that were available in the 23-24 cycle versus the 25 cycle. And then same appendix on page 26. And same like photos and documentation. I would just say again that I think these files need to be looked at together and the valuation should make sense in comparison to each other. And that would conclude my presentation on this file. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barocas.
Yes. So on page 16, on your cap chart, you opt for 5 3/4, which is your base rate for 46 to 59. This building was built in 2023. Should your overall capitalization rate is the same as a 46 to 59 base rate. Does that not seem high?
Yeah, so it is the same as the 46 to 59 age group. It would be on the higher end for a new apartment, but it's based on the different features of this property. I don't think a 0.5 adjustment is unreasonable when you look at the different risk factors of the property. We did a lesser adjustment for the 25 file, only 0.25% adjustment. So when I look at that, it makes sense when you look at it together. If it was a brand new suburban apartment, then I would say the cap rate would be high. But for this property site specific, it would make sense.
So the 0.5, like you added a half a point of cap here based on, just to be clear, the parking to unit ratio and the heritage designation. Is that basically what the adjustment's from?
Yes, and also the location.
Okay. All right, those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brokus. Mr. Seelan, questions?
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Knight?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have no questions either. Just before we wrap up, Ms. Cates, just want to confirm no rebuttal.
That's correct.
Mr. Brokus?
That's correct.
Okay, and Mr. Brokus, summation.
I mean, for this one, we're at 202 per unit. Last one's 225. When you look at it on a per unit basis, compared to the newer buildings that have transacted, like we're definitely not overshooting it. The applicant's in the 180 range. That seems to be the figure that's the outlier, not the city's conclusion. So I think our overall conclusions are sound. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brokus. Ms. Cates?
I would just say that we look at these properties on an income approach. The income approach in terms of the parameters and the cap rate that's used would be considered the equalizer. Looking at per unit basis, unless we're doing adjustments for every difference. Direct comparison isn't an accurate method for these type of properties. So I would just ask that the board considers all the site specific information that we've used today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That will conclude item number 3. Okay, before we begin on item number 4, shall we take a 5-minute break?
I
Yes.
just need to get 221 Stradbrook sent to me, please, the first property.
Okay, I'll send them to you.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
let's come back at 10:15. Is that okay? And
Okay.
then that'll get us time to get Mr. Neufeld here and for Ms. Knight to get the documents.
Thank you.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Thank you. I'd like to call our meeting back to order. And before we begin, we need to get Mr. Neufeld sworn in, please.
Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Rocky Neufeld.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to start with item number 5 on our agenda. This is file number 25-20221 Stradbrook. And Mr. Neufeld, before we begin, I'd like to confirm that this is an appeal of the assessed value of the property.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, Mr. Barocas.
Okay. Thank you very much. File 25-20, roll number 12097806855, 221 Stradbrook Avenue. So we've got 2 lines of classification. We've got commercial, restaurant, 694,000, and then we've got the residential at 21,261 million for 21,955,000 total. So it's a multi-use apartment, 18 stories, built in 2019, 145 suites, 128 indoor parking, 57 outdoor parking. So on to page 3. So we've got 28 bachelor units, 101 1-bedroom, and 16 2-bedroom for 145 units in total. We have an average monthly rent of $1,567.75. So you can, for this one, you see that the vacancy rate is 25%. The expense ratio has been overridden to 47%. And using a 5.1 cap, that generates 21,261,000 rounded for the apartment. Why such a high vacancy rate, you may think? Well, there was a fire, and if you go to my page 9, so there was a fire on the roof in August of 2023. According to permits, did about $10 million worth of damage. That permit is found on, sorry, page 16. Interior alterations in existing multi-story, multi-tenant building to include the restoration and repairs due to fire. Rebuilding to a pre-fire event. Mechanical and electrical works being done. So rebuilding to pre-fire event, they declared $10 million to bring it back. So looking at the overall valuation of the property, and if you go to my page, sorry, 13, it shows that the reduction, the pre-fire assessment was 31,408,000. The revised assessment, the one we're looking at now, is 21,261,000. So the reduction was about 10,147,000. The assessor who did the adjustment, instead of just doing an kind of like a lump sum reduction after of 10 million, decided to tweak these parameters instead to get to pretty much the same place, actually a bit more than the 10 million. So that's why the vacancy is pushed up to 25%. That's why the expense ratio is pushed to 47%. It's not so much that that's what it's operating as, or is it's only 25% vacant, because when the fire happened, everyone had to leave. And that's the period of time that we're looking at right now. The building as damaged, not occupiable, with $10 million to bring it back to the pre-fire event. So the reduction was 10, in assessment was 10,147,000. So it's pretty much what the permit value was. So like I have rent comparables and stuff. Like I would have just personally, if it was me who did the adjustment, I would have just taken 10 million flat off, but the assessor decided to tweak the parameters instead. So I don't know how much use it would be going into these parameters. For the restaurant, we do have $26 a square foot. I spoke with the other assessor this morning. Apparently the restaurant was vacant for about a month and then they're allowed to operate again. And we've got $26 per square foot on that. The comparable leases for the restaurant are found on page 6. And then our cap rate chart, etc. So again, we're looking at the building as not in its pre-fix-up state, like after the fire. That's where the stuff came from. So the permit here on page 14 shows the construction permit. Total project value 31 million. Then we've got the fire that happened, fire permit on page 15, August 25th. And then we've got the interior alteration, rebuilding to pre-fire event, 10 million bucks. So, and then they got occupancy, looks like at the end of January 2025. Then just some details and photos of the building itself from the marketing website. Look, I know in the past we've like 2440 Portage, the building that the tenants had to be evacuated because the parking structure had structural issues. The method we use is, it was a big job, but it wasn't like enough where the place was going to be demolished. We just took that permitted cost off the assessment. And that's what we use for the valuation in its interim state. So overall valuation 21,955,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brokus. Mr. Neufeld, questions?
Yes. Just you don't have the copy of the supplemental for the reduction due to fire in your report, or at least I couldn't find it. Is it in here?
The supplemental
The data?
reduction
Yeah.
on page 13.
13, I thought was, oh yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, so that, the effective date on that, is it stated here? Because that's what I couldn't see.
It's for the years like 2023, 2024 on the.
Yeah, but, well, the fire happened in August of 23. Was this dated? Are you having it for the entire year?
Let me pull it up. It would have been.
I don't see it. Usually there's a date on here, right?
Right. I know I had to cut off some of the notice to try and keep some personal information out of my brief, but let me double check when this was issued.
Yeah, just the period, yeah.
Yeah. So we have it effective the 17th of August 2023.
Okay. All right. So that's the date that should have shown up here. So then as a question on the math, 2 years after that would be August 17th, 2025, correct?
That would be correct, yes.
Okay. And on the date of the fire, what was the vacancy rate?
Well, when the fire happened, everyone had to be evicted. So
okay, 100%. Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
And when could they come back in?
That would be.
I think you were saying January of this year?
January 21st, as per the occupancy date of this year on page 17.
Okay, and is there an occupancy permit for January 21 then?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. So we have a fire evacuation August 17th, 23, and a new occupancy permit January 21st, 25. Okay. And on the permits for repair, and I'm just trying to read these, and they start, I guess, page 15.
Yeah, 15 is the fire permit.
Okay.
The report, and then on the next page is the rebuilding to pre-fire event.
Right. So the first 2 pages, 15 and 16, are dated. Okay, no, 15 is dated August 25, 23. 16 is dated March 25, 24. And that's the one that says 10 million on it, right?
That's correct, yes.
Now, but the first one has no number on it, no values.
Yeah, that's just the fire report by the looks of it.
Oh, I see. Fire report. Okay. And then the next one is interior alterations. And then I think there's a third one, page 17, dated January 21. And that is interior alterations and rebuilding, right?
Yeah, that's an occupancy permit. Like it says OC
Right.
in the top left corner. So that's when they're allowed back in.
Oh, okay. OC. I got you. Okay. All right. You had mentioned that there were some other people working on it, and I don't want to I'm not out to look for saying anything bad about anyone, don't get me wrong here, but we've had conversations with 3 different people now, yourself, Jennifer and Kim. Jennifer apparently worked on the supplemental, but Kim had asked for some repair costs. Do you have any notes on that?
I do not. In my
Okay.
brief. No, I think Ken was part of the previous appeal, I believe.
Okay, so he wasn't involved because we have an email from him asking for the repair costs, and the number is significantly different from what the permit says. That's why I'm wondering if you got his notes. The number was actually 24 million on repairs.
No, I don't have any. I don't have any record of that. No.
No, okay, and what you were saying, and I'm not. You can obviously see what I'm trying to get to is that you had said, well, if it was assessed at 32 million, you just take 10 million off for repairs. It was kind of like a real informal way of looking at it, right?
Yeah, I mean it's difficult to like. It's not like it because there's instances where there's a fire and the place is clearly like fit to be demolished, but it's still up. Then that's something that in cases like that we knock it down to land. It looks like based on the overall valuation of this property and them subsequently fixing it back up, that deduction for the cost to bring it back to the pre-fire state made more sense.
Yes, but under what authority in the act does that come under?
Authority to what?
Well, to deal with significant alterations. Like, is there any sort of governing authority that says, well, you've told us it's 10 million to rebuild, so we'll just knock off 10 million for now? How can, I guess I'm wondering here is if it can't be occupied at all, wouldn't the value be 0 because you don't have a legal right to use it?
I wouldn't say that. I would say like, so I was looking at this property and it's like if there was say there was a vacant piece of land right next door to it, developable, same zoning, same size, same everything, and then you have this building that's up, but that's worth about 31, 35, whatever year we're looking at, with about $10 million back to bring it to where it was before. Is it worth the same as the vacant lot next door?
Right, but if you're getting these estimates on repair, and you can say, did the city get their own estimations of repairs?
No, we didn't like send anyone out, not to my knowledge, to do an estimate. That's something that would come under.
Yeah, okay. So if you relied solely on this initial permit rather than the actual costs that were proven later, I mean, yeah, I'm more of having a conversation with you than having questions.
Okay.
But don't you at some point have to consider not the initial estimate of value, but the final tally of costs?
I mean, if there was another tally of costs to look at, then of course. But I mean, this is the permit that was taken out in March, end of March 24, when the fire happened, end of August 23. Because I assume it wouldn't be like the fire happens and someone walks up and says, "Oh, it's going to be 10 million." It takes time for them to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, you know what the damage was. It was in the internal shafts and the HVAC systems all the way down to the ground, and no one would have known in the beginning, would they, how much it's going to cost to fix until they begin doing the work?
Right, like they wouldn't know in August, and even in March, like I mean, I'm sure you've renovated things. Sometimes things cost more, sometimes things cost less once you get going, right?
No, it's like a car. You bring it in, they give you an estimate, and they find all sorts of other problems in it, right?
They love to do that, yeah.
Okay, and the last question for you is on page Get to it. I was looking at the first supplemental. This was on page 12. This is the one that changed it from land only to an improved building at 1.9 million to 32 million.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Okay. Was this 1.9 million value ever actually in place?
Okay, let me see.
I mean, as I recall, we knew the supplemental was coming for 23, and the 1.9 million was out there, but we weren't going to bother with it because the supplemental was coming.
Because it got supped, this is for what year?
23. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wasn't involved. I know there
Yeah,
was,
I'm just wondering, that's the whole calendar year though, 23 as I recall though. But
yeah, no, there's like back in 20, there was some replot on the property. I wasn't involved in putting the property
no,
on.
no, I'm just like, I guess my question is the 1.9 million land value for 2023 was never actually levied on this site because the supplemental changed everything.
Yeah, the sup, okay, so the sup roll year, it was sup effective June of 2021. So that,
Yeah, okay. So okay, that's all I'm getting at. The 1.9 was never existed. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neufeld. Ms. Knight, questions for the assessor?
So the whole building had to be emptied in August of 2023 and nobody could move back in till January 21st, 2025?
yes.
And we're giving a 25% vacancy only?
So what it was is the assessor who made the adjustment, instead of like on page 3 here, underneath capitalized income, there's a row that says adjustments.
Mhm.
Instead of taking just the fire workup and just putting a negative $10 million adjustment, they decided to tweak the vacancy rate and expense ratio to get to a $10 million reduction that way. But the building, but again, like the building was not occupiable until the end of 2025. But I mean, again, the formula here calculates a little over a $10 million reduction from what it was operating at before.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knight. Mr. Seelan?
Sure. My question is I'll say restaurant. I think you said that it wasn't operational for just 1 month. Is that true?
Yes, that's the information that we have on file, and then I confirmed that with the other assessor this morning. I confirmed his note this morning.
So the restaurant actually functioned, I'll say a month after the fire.
Yeah, the fire was on the roof and the restaurant's at the bottom. So, I mean, they had to get out of there to figure out what was going on. But as per our notes, they were allowed to get back to it a month later.
Okay, and we don't know what the actual repair costs are for this property when it comes to the roof fire shafts and
Yeah.
HVAC and stuff.
Yeah, we have 10 million on page 16.
Mm-hmm.
It says rebuilding to pre-fire events. So that's what we have for declared construction value.
Okay, but what did the actual cost come to?
I'm not sure. This is what we have. This is the information that I have available. I haven't seen anything else.
Okay. Thank you. That's all my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I have no questions, Mr. Brokus. Thank you for that. Mr. Neufeld, your presentation, please.
Thank you. This is going to be very more unusual situation than most tax appeals. I think you've heard the facts. There was a fire, and our position is that once you lose your occupancy permit, you lose your value. And I have sent, I don't think I have to send this in as rebuttal, but I did. So at least you had a copy of it. You didn't have to look through the Municipal Assessment Act for the appropriate legislation. But if you've got your copies of it, as we all have them handy. No, I'm kidding. The act under definitions.
Mr. Neufeld, is that your rebuttal?
Well, no, it's not rebuttal. It's the act.
Okay.
So you don't have to provide the act as evidence, because it's something we should all be aware of.
No, I appreciate that, but you said you sent something
Well,
as rebuttal.
Yeah, and I restated it in rebuttal just so that we had it in written form in case everyone didn't have it, a copy of it available.
We all have the act, yes.
Okay, good. Under the definition of accessible property, it's a kind of a meandering discussion, but it says it means that it's real property or personal property situated in a municipality that does not include, then there's 8 items it doesn't include, one of which is an improvement that is a new building or a new addition. So it does not include a new building or a new addition while the improvement under subclause I is under construction, or the improvement under subclause II is under substantial renovation, and until the improvement is or is capable of being occupied or used for purposes other than construction or substantial renovation, or the second anniversary date of commencement of the construction or substantial renovation. So what this essentially means is, while you're undergoing these repairs, you do not have an occupancy permit. That was pulled August 17th with the fire, as you saw in the permits. Notice of fire, that means you lose your occupancy permit. You have 2 years wherein it's not to be assessed while it's being repaired. The occupancy permit was issued about 17 months later, in January of 2025, at which point it fell within the 2-year period. And then at that point, the site can be used again. And that's essentially what we're saying for this. And I don't think there's anything new that I really wanted to bring forward. There's a fire, and we're looking for a land value of 1.5 million. And I was asking questions about the original land assessment that was never in place at 1.9 million. We understand that the commercial tenant did not get evicted, so there was still a commercial use. And that assessment for the commercial use was 694,000. What we going back to the when this was the Winter Club and we had it changed to residential usage, we're requesting that the value be 1 million residential and 500,000 for Class 60. Again, what's the value of a restaurant in a building that's had a fire in it? You know, you've lost your your audience below, above you, and the workers might eat more food, but it's certainly not a viable. You're not building it for the restaurant use. That was just an issue that it wasn't hurt by the fire. Now, the costs on it were. I hadn't seen these permits. I am looking at an email, and I'm going to give it to you verbally. because I forgot to put it in. But I have an email from Kim Wong on November 6, 2024, asking for the actual costs. I responded, Kim, repair costs are huge, over 20 million. Why does this matter? This does not have any relation to value. Are you going to land value or not? That was my response. And that was sent to Kim and Jennifer, who I knew was working on it. So they had the knowledge that the costs were over 20, the actual number, which we didn't have back then. We didn't even know what the actual number was until the occupancy permit showed up in January. No one does, because it's being repaired, and it's not a simple matter. It was 24 million was the repair. And we do not agree that you simply take 32 minus 24. It must be worth 8 million. No, that's speculative value, because you have to speculate that you're actually going to repair it. You have to speculate it's going to be, until it's actually finished, you just don't know. The appropriate method is follow the occupancy permit. Pulled August 17th, reinstated January 21st, 2025. In between, it doesn't matter. As the Act states, it's under construction, or and you revert to land value. So I think it's a fairly simple issue we're looking at. Sorry, I didn't silence my phone and it's bugging me here. I think it's a fairly simple matter. You don't take a new build building and say, well, when you're finished, your building's gonna be worth 10 million, so we're gonna give you 20% off until it's finished. You just don't do that. You note that the assessor's evidence on the supplemental that changed the value from bare land to an approved property was triggered by the original occupancy permit. 1.9 million, raise it to 32 million. And now they're looking for a different. Now I understand what went on, and I don't think that this necessarily falls under a policy or evaluation that is dealt with often. And when I get to the rebuttal, I will discuss 5 instances where and what was done with them, and these were all ones that I have first-hand knowledge of. And that's my very simple case. And wait, I'm going to put this in. We're not going to continue with the 2025 value. We're going to ask for that to be confirmed, because the permit is back, occupancy permit is back in place. And our opinion is that there'll be at least a year of absorption, so the value is going to be depressed for a while. We'd hope that it stays where it is, but when we filed that appeal, we weren't aware of when the doors would reopen, so it was done for a caution basis. So it's only this 23 and 24 values that we're contesting today.
Thank you, Mr. Neufeld. Mr. Barocas, questions?
Yes, just on also questions about the I guess the act when it gets to the rebuttal, because the excerpts in there. So okay, so just looking at your evaluation here, you put it down to land value. So in your opinion, the improvements that were in place after the fire had no value whatsoever?
Well, that's a two-pronged question. Remember, is first you're talking about the physical, and then we talk about the legal. Legally, no, they had no value. You don't have a permit. Now, in valuation, it is not the bricks and mortar that have value. It is the legal rights that are associated with it, the right to use that property. You can have the most expensive palace in the world, but if you don't have an occupancy permit, it's not worth anything. Rights go first. After that, you consider the bricks and mortar. Now, on the bricks and mortar side, the issue we had here is the unknown. No one knew what it would cost repair. When you have smoke damage and fire damage and water damage, it is, like I said, until you're finished, until you're cleaned up, you don't know what it costs. And I would never put a value in the unknown like that. If you were going to do that, you wouldn't have a couple of guys shooting emails around to establish it. You'd hire engineers and professionals. And they would come back and say, well, give or take 10, 15%, this is what our estimate of repair is.
Okay, so just to be clear, like if there was an identically sized and zoned piece of land right next door, it would sell for the same value as this building that had a fire on the roof? Is that, just to be clear? That's
Yeah, you should. That's the appropriate way to do it on from a valuation. I know sometimes I get carried away on this, but so here's my great little book here with all my dog ears in it. Valuation of real estate in Canada, and chapter 1, verse 1. Yeah, the value of any real estate is based on the rights it has, not the bricks and mortar. And that's, you can think of some very convoluted examples where people overbuild something. The one I always joke about is putting a 30-story office building in the field in Altona. It's not worth millions of dollars. It's worth nothing because there's no one to occupy it, right? And that's what we're getting at. You got an empty building that's damaged, unknown repair costs, and uncertainty, no occupancy permit. And the assessment department doesn't assess properties until the occupancy permit's issued.
Okay, so you mentioned that you emailed an estimate of 24 million over. Is there anywhere in your submissions today where you have the source of that figure?
I actually just sent it to you, and so you can read it over. But it came to me from one of the participants on the email string, who was Ron Sushi, I forgot his position with the ownership group.
So I have an email, but do you have like a report or something?
Oh, no, be like insurance cost. No, I didn't get that. I mean, we can get it for you. This is entirely my fault. I should have had it. I was out of town and I missed I should have had it for you, but you can. Ron gave me a number of 24 million, and this was back in November of last year.
Okay, and then just for the land value you have, the 1.5 million, how is that determined? Is there comparables or something on? Is there?
No. I mean, we're not going to be we don't have a hard line on what the value is. It's land value. It was previously assessed at 1.9 million. That was not appealed, but that's because we didn't we knew the supplemental was coming out. That I'm not going to dispute if the board says 1.9 million, because there is a placeholder for that value. It's not a concept of chasing a value on that land. It's just the concept here is the improvements. Until you get an occupancy permit, they have no value. They could say 1.9, they could say 1.9 and add on 694,000 for the restaurant. That's not our issue today. We don't care about that. We care about the problem of assessing an improvement that is not legally able to be occupied.
Those are my questions on his main brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barocas. Mr. Seelan, questions for Mr. Neufeld?
Yes, can you take me to the page in the municipal act that you were quoting from?
It's the definitions at the beginning.
At this point, I have no other further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, questions?
So when a building is being built and it just has an external structure, no taxes, like the value doesn't change, it's just the land value then?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's within the 2-year time frame. But generally, I don't want to speak for the assessor today. I've never even seen if it exceeds the 2 years that the assessor is going to jump the gun and try to assess it, because what they need is an engineer's report to determine cost of completion, right? It's not something that and most projects are done within 2 years, except that bankrupt one across the street from me. That might take longer, but
this one was done within the 2 years.
yeah. You know what? If you remember going down Archibald, at the corner of Archibald and Plinkett, there was that concrete frame, 3-story framing, which has been up for what, 40, 50 years? Technically, the assessor could put a value on that framing. And the difficulty is, of course, there's no comparables. It is in place. I can speak from experience. I had some very unusual damage to my house, which took us 5 years to repair because it was environmentally based, and we had to go through testing and remediation. And I reported it all along the way, and I said, this is what I'm going through. And it was dealt with very fairly. So I think, they have some ability to go past the 2 years, but in our case, we didn't. This case, there was no need to do it.
Okay, so you were saying that the main fire was not about the suites. It was about something that went from the bottom to the basement to the top. What was that?
It was through the vertical penetrations. So within a high rise like this, there'll be a lot of shafts. There'll be elevator shafts,
Right.
air exhaust, and utilities, and all going down the shafts. And the fire ended up on the rooftop equipment and then got sucked into the rest of the building.
So it went down the shafts, but the actual suites, there was nothing wrong with them.
It was smoke damage, and
Okay.
the fact that the HVAC equipment was destroyed, so you had no services to these to the units.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Neufeld, I have no questions. So you indicated you've sent in rebuttal evidence?
Yes.
The rebuttal has been shared on SharePoint. If you can please refresh your SharePoint, you'll find it.
Thank you.
Ms. Knight, you have the rebuttal already via your email.
Can you send it to me, please?
I've sent it to you before. Can you please
Can you
check?
send it again?
Yeah, for sure. And Mr. Assessor, I believe you have the rebuttal as well.
I do. Thank you.
Hey, can people let me know when they have it, please? Ms. Knight?
She's just sending it.
Send it to you on your way. Let me know when you receive it.
Okay. Got it now.
Okay, Mr. Neufeld, go ahead then.
Yeah, these are just 5 examples of how the problems have been dealt with. Page 2 is a building on Meridian, and it was a very large industrial building, and on the date indicated here, which I believe was September of 2020, oh, sorry, here we go, October 15th, 2024, Property and Planning forced the closure of the building due to failure to meet minimum building code, and evicted everybody. So this is a question of using what we call police power, which is the same as permits, to take away occupancy permits. We wrote the assessor, explained the situation, gave him the documentation, and they agreed, and they changed the value from 4.5 million to 638,000, which represents land value. This building was subsequently demolished, but again, we're dealing only with the half a year later, but we're dealing with how it was handled at the time. So this was parties were in agreement with it. The next one is on page 3, and this is 138 Portage. This building had lost as it's an older building, and as the tenants left, they were no longer granting them new occupancy permits because the stairwells were too narrow. Eventually, it had a fire in it on the top again, and the value was reduced by agreement to land value, and it wasn't much of a reduction, but it already wasn't in a great condition. But that's land value, and that was a negotiated agreement. And the next one is 279 Portage. And this building was an older office building, and this one was actually under renovation for 3 years because they were changing the use from sort of an office use, a retail office, to an apartment, and it was taking a long time. And we just brought it in under appeal and said, let's just switch this to land value until the work is finished, and the board agreed with it. And that was the number I put forward, $1 million for land value, and the not appealed or anything. It was an example, just like today's example. The point on this is it doesn't matter why something happened, whether it's a calamity, a failure of meeting code, or a desire to change your use. Once you undertake the project, whatever the motivation is, you lose value. And you're in that interim period. And then on the next one was 915 Corridon. This was an apartment block, and it had wings. One wing had a fire. The rest of the wings was evacuated because of smoke damage, and we requested land value of $1 million. I was just using 1 million all the time because it's a nice round number. This was, I think it's like an acre and a half of land on Corridon, and the board agreed that. And Mr. Barakas was there too. Shame on you. Don't you remember that? I'm funning with you. Don't worry about it. And the last one was 10 Keenly Side. This was a commercial, industrial commercial bays, and they had a fire in a tire fire in the back compound, and the entire site was inundated with damage, smoke, and water damage, because there's actually a depression on the site, and it was filled with water, and it was wintertime as well. And this was a request I made to the city to say, can you change this to land value until we get repairs done on it? And they agreed to do that. And that's land value. Again, this is the perfect comparable to what we're having today. So I'm not inventing this as a method. I think it's a very fair way to say is, who cares what the cause was? You lose your occupancy, you lose your ability to earn income. Hypothetically, put it in the market and offer it for sale. You're not going to get the old value on it. You're going to get land value on it. And that's so I'm done now.
Thank you, Mr. Neufeld. Mr. Barocas, questions on the rebuttal?
So just looking at the last page here, the definition of an accessible property from the Act. Right at the bottom, it says this from the second anniversary date of the commencement of the construction or substantial renovation. So at the time of the fire, because the building was originally put on in June of 2021, the fire would have taken place 2 years after it was complete. Is that not correct?
Sure, but just like the examples I showed you, they all had occupancy permits that were existing. They had their original construction completed. What happened is that a catastrophe happened in between. 915 Corydon is over 100 years old. So it's when a calamity strikes, and they talk about substantial renovation required, it just doesn't earn income. And I actually have about 5 more examples in partial losses where some we had agreement on, some the board ruled on, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I do actually remember now inspecting that property with you. That building was like you said, it was 100 years older than this one. So just to be clear, the improvements that are in place, you're putting no value on them. You're putting the same value as if the building didn't exist at all. Foundation, framing, everything. There's
That's correct. And the same, like the example of 10 Keenly side, there actually ended up being some structural damage in one portion of it, but the rest was just cleanup required. And same with the subject property. It's made it until you got your occupancy permit back, you didn't have the ability to earn income under the income approach. You can't have a fantasy value on it. It has to follow, the building has to have the legal ability to earn money in order for it to have value. And we've been involved. I've been involved with a lot of cases like this because I get involved with a lot of litigation work on properties, and there's no middle ground here, unless you can bring in experts and prove it. And no expert is going to say, "Oh no, there's $10 million in damage, and it'll be fine when it's all fixed. So just take off 10 million." Nobody does that. It's an unknown. We're not speculating. When it gets its permit, it comes back. And remember, we only have 2-year cycles here. So and the assessors always got the ability to sup it and bring it back. So it's not permanent. This is just a question of, okay, react to a temporary situation, deal with it properly. When it's fixed, move it back to where it came from. And we're not going to object to that. It's just the hypothetical idea of putting a property up for sale that's suffering damage is the way to test the market. So if you put this building up for sale on August 18th, 2023, and tried to sell it, what are you going to get for it? I'm suggesting you're going to get land value.
Did the owner consider selling the property? Do they consider that might be in their best interest to sell it at 1.5 million?
Well, you have a 2-part question, and yes, those discussions took place, and they made the decision to have it repaired. They felt, in their opinion, that it was the best course of action. And as far as what they would potentially sell it for, that never came into the equation.
Okay. And so just like looking at the properties in your rebuttal, so this first property, it was actually demolished, this one on, I think it was Meridian, you
Oh
said?
yeah, because it was a basket case. There were too many bad things with it. And the point in that lesson is just that the city agreed that you lose your occupancy, you should revert to land value.
Okay. But it was in a state that did end up getting demolished.
Well, no, it was like some of the standards on it were inferior. Like there wasn't adequate floor loading on it, and for one, and you can't really fix floor loading, so you can have like an industrial capability to it. They never designed it for that, so there was no point keeping it.
Okay, so it was unrepairable, basically.
Well, it was not economically repairable. Everything's repairable, but it wasn't worth fixing.
Okay.
But the point was that what triggered that reduction change was property and planning evicting everybody.
Okay. And then this one on Keenly side, this last one in your rebuttal, that 50% of it was damaged by the fire. So is that like throughout the suites, 50% of them
There was,
on fire?
again, this is like, now it's 15 years ago. So I'm gonna have to remember, because I actually got out to the scene while the tire fire was still burning, but they had one larger building where the roof was destroyed. And I might have got this backwards. The fire could have started within and then spread to the tire pile. And that part of the building was I think it was rebuilt. And then they had a lower ceiling portion on it that had about 5 or 6 CRUs, and they had to be repaired because it was water and smoke damage.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barocas. Ms. Knight, do you have any questions on the rebuttal evidence?
So all these properties in your rebuttal evidence, they never came back into play, or they did come back into play?
Oh,
People actually moved back into them after they were repaired?
Yeah.
or-
Okay, so Meridian, no, it was
Right.
beyond hope. 138 Portage, I've lost touch with them. I don't think they've done any work on it. It hasn't been demolished because Heritage is keeping it alive. But they had thought all sorts of ideas for conversion, but I think it's still sitting there doing nothing.
Okay.
There's last I saw there was a tarp on the roof. 279 Portage was eventually completed and is now a multifamily building.
So there was no in that time of completion, the value was placed at the land value only.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the same goes for 915 Corridon. That was eventually repaired as well, and is now back up and operating. The only hitch on Corridon was that because of its age, there was a lot of code upgrades required.
Okay, and so both those buildings were totally evacuated. Nobody came back into them until the date that it was said okay.
That is correct. And the last one, Keenly side, yeah, that was repaired and is now being fully occupied again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seelan.
My questions are being asked and answered, Madam
Okay.
Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick question, Mr. Neufeld. We saw in the assessor's evidence, main evidence, that a reduction was made $10 million based on permit. For these properties in your rebuttal, were there permits issued for any of these? Did you provide, or are you aware of any costs associated? Like you say, it's based on land, but we obviously aren't privy to decisions or evidence provided at previous hearings.
Right.
So we don't know all the evidence and why they made the decision.
Like you're saying about permits for repairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Meridian permit for demo, Portage, nothing. 279 Portage had costs in the permit. I could probably look it up what it is. I have it somewhere. 915. Yeah, I seem to recall, I probably have that in file as well, what the permits were. There was a dispute, but that one, the repair cost was higher because of code upgrades, but if you want me to look it up, I'm certain I can do
No,
it.
that's fine. The
But
quantum
there
is,
was, yeah.
the quantum is of course quite different too, right? For these properties.
Well, yes, it is, because none of them were brand new high-rise multifamily.
Right.
And that's why it's so much different. But, I guess we have to follow a principle rather than be concerned about what that number is, because it's
No, I appreciate that. Yeah.
no, that's my take on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I have no additional questions. Mr. Barocas, do you have rebuttal evidence?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. And would you care for summation on this property?
I think my thoughts have been put forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Neufeld?
Other than just to clarify, as Mr. Baraka's question me, how come I didn't put a value for land? That wasn't the main issue here. The main issue is you see that there was an assessment at 1.9. Then you saw that there was a restaurant in there that continued to operate at 694,000. That's not the basis of our concern. The basis of our concern is the loss of occupancy rights on the multifamily portion of it. And we put a number of 1.5 million on it. Arguably, you could go, based on what you saw today, to 2.6 million. And that's not the issue. The issue is we've lost rights to occupy for 17 months. And it was temporary. It's over. It's done. Repair costs were a minimum of 24 million. And I apologize that I didn't provide that for you, but I thought Mr. Wong had forwarded his answers from me that the city did have it. It was not 10 million. And the concept of taking the city's idea of value and subtracting the repair costs is well, you kind of lose grasp with market value, because you're assuming there's a certainty, and a certainty of repair costs does not exist, nor do you deal with the motivation of the developer to take on the project and complete it. It's an interesting idea. I would call it kind of rather informal methodology, but you heard the number, it's 24 million. We never challenged the 32 million on quantum in the first place. So perhaps it would have come in lower. And that's why it's difficult to rely on that. So that's I've talked too much today. I'm sorry to repeat myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Neufeld. Okay, that will conclude item number 5. So we'll backtrack now to item number 4. And I believe, Mr. Neufeld, you indicated you were going to seek confirmation.
That's correct.
Okay, so Mr. Barocas, if you could just give us your values, and then we'll, you don't need to go into a lot of detail on this, and then we'll just turn it over.
Okay. Thank you. Just let me pull it up here. All right. So file number 25-4, roll number 12097806855. 221 Stradbrook Avenue. Valuation 24,686,000. Same methodology was used in regards to accounting for the damage, the fire damage, as the last file. And that sub's found on page 17 to show that we made a deduction of over 10 million. So that's my evidence. Thank you.
And your values, Mr. Barocas?
23,948,000 for classification 20T, and on the 60T, it's 738,000.
Thank you. And Mr. Neufeld?
Yes, as I said, we appealed this on a cautionary basis, and we weren't sure when we filed when the work would be completed. So I don't think it's worth pursuing further. There's only 21 days where it was disadvantaged, and from this point forward, there's going to be a loss in income due to absorption. We'll see what happens in the future if the city decides to sup it upwards or not.
Thank you, Mr. Neufeld. Okay, before we conclude, Ms. Knight or Mr. Seelan, do you have questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay, Mr. Seelan?
Yeah.
Okay, that will conclude item number 4. And with that, we've now heard all items scheduled and this hearing is now adjourned. So thank you, Mr. Neufeld and Mr. Brokus, for your presentations today.
Thank you.